Good afternoon. My name is Sheila Lamb, and I'm with the Virginia SBDC Network. For those of you that are not familiar with our organization, the Virginia Small Business Development Center is a partnership program between the U.S. Small Business Administration, George Mason University, and local host institutions throughout Virginia. With 26 locations across the Commonwealth, we provide training and technical assistance to small businesses in their local communities. Our one-on-one advising services are available at no charge. Today's webinar, Mobile Apps: How to Plan, Execute, and Launch, is presented by the Virginia SBDC Network. Please mark your calendars for the next webinar in our Digital Bootcamp series, Keeping Up with Digital Marketing, A's for Your Q's, ChatGPT, on November 19th. And I'll drop that registration link into the chat momentarily. We are recording today's presentation, and it will be posted on our website, virginiasbdc.org. Due to the large number of participants, everyone's microphone is muted and the chat feature is turned off. But if you have questions during the presentation, you can type those into the Q&A box, and we will address them at the end of the session. We have also enabled the live transcript function, which you can show or hide via your own meeting controls. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenter for today's session, Cameron Nelson, CEO of Tenzing Startup Consultants. Cameron has over 19 years of experience in technology and is a senior tech consultant in Silicon Valley, helping Fortune 500 companies improve their digital marketing and e-commerce. At the same time, he also founded several tech companies, including a software as a service website for tree preservation and a blockchain platform for nonprofits. Cameron is accomplished in language, culture, has an MBA and MA. He believes new technology products have the ability to help shape our world for the better. Please join me in welcoming Cameron Nelson.
Thank you for the introduction. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on mobile apps. I think this is a really pertinent topic for a lot of businesses today as they're looking to increase their online sales. And so we're going to be talking about the strategies of building an app, whether it's a good idea for your business, and look at all the different considerations you need to be aware of as you go down this journey of building an app for your business, or if you're creating a new business, if you're a startup, then how do you develop an app for your startup? So I hope this is informative, and please feel free to ask me questions at the end. If everybody has 2 or 3 questions, that'll be great. So jot them down as we go, and then we can talk about those when the presentation's over. So with that, let's jump right into it. The first thing we need to discuss is, should your business develop a mobile app? Because a mobile app is not a path that every business should go down. And here's some of the main considerations. I mean, the first thing to be aware of is that there's a lot of mobile apps out there. So you really got to have a good strategy to make sure your marketing or your development budget and the expense for the app isn't wasted. Looking at the main 2 outlets for apps, you have the iOS or the Apple Store. As of 2024, it's projected to end this year at about 2.2 million apps and has over 100 billion in total sales. Again, projected to the end of 2024. Compare that to the Android or the Google App Store, which has many more apps, 3.9 million, and is projected to be at about 50 billion in total sales. So interestingly, it might have more apps, but those have fewer sales for the Android store. You might wonder why that is. Well, generally speaking, demographics-wise, people who have iPhones just spend more money buying apps than the Android and the Google phone users. So that's the trend, and we see that this Android share is decreasing. The revenue is decreasing. It decreased about 11% over last year, and the Apple iOS store is increasing slightly for its revenue. Another key thing to note is that the total 2024 app economy, which includes things like any in-app purchases you make and advertising for apps, this is almost $1 trillion. It's over $900 billion. So there's a lot of money being spent developing apps from the point of view of the developers and the business owners like yourselves, as well as the people buying the apps and buying in-app purchases within the apps. So some of the key advantages of having a mobile app for your business is that they're used by a lot of people. They also provide an opportunity for engagement with your customers. You know, you can consider traditional marketing channels and social media, like Facebook posts, as a way to engage, while also mobile apps offer you another way to engage and to get feedback. In many businesses, they provide new ways to increase your customers and your sales. And there's a lot of different ways to create apps. And I think this is an advantage because you're not really limited to just one store. You have at least two. You're not limited to one way to create an app. You have multiple, which we'll talk about. So it gives you a lot of flexibility, can meet your budget and also meet your needs. And also having an app for your business, it gives you greater profit potential versus a business without an app that maybe just runs purely in maybe a brick and mortar store, could have a lot of high overhead expenses. Overhead expenses for an app are really quite minimal. So if you can offload a lot of your sales to an app, you can see higher profits. However, there's not without its risks developing an app. So some of the cautions are that apps are very complex in both the scope of the app, which is what features it's going to have, and the time it takes to build it. A lot of times, unexpected issues come up. I've worked with probably between 50 and 60 businesses and startups in developing mobile apps. And so, first-time app creators such as yourself, you're probably going to have a lot of unexpected things. So just be ready for those. Be ready for things you haven't thought of yet that take your time. And if your app fails to come up with a new or innovative solution, it can be a real risk. You don't want to go down the road of spending money without having a very clear vision of how you're going to make a profit. You also don't want to start building an app if you don't have enough funds to finish the app. I would recommend whatever budget you have, or that you talk with a developer, you figure out a budget. You probably want to have at least 10% more reserved for unexpected things, which usually do come up. And another caution is if you hire the wrong developer team from the beginning, it can be really hard to communicate well and get a quality app that you want. And we're going to talk about how you can choose the best developer for your app. So developing an app has its pros and cons, but let's talk about some of the key trends that you might not be aware of as far as developing an app and launching an app in 2024. The first one is that free apps are about 98% of the apps in the App Store, and they do generate revenue, things like in-app purchases and advertising. So probably most of you want to consider this free app model, unless you're one of the 2% that thinks you can actually charge for your app as somebody downloads it. Secondly, gaming apps continue to dominate in popularity. There's a few popular games. They're huge money makers. Obviously, many games that are developed end up not being very hugely popular, but in some cases they really are. So gaming apps or gamifying an app that has another purpose is a really good way to drive more usage of an app. Third, AI and machine learning are really changing the ways people both interact with apps and develop apps. You can do things like have AI recommendations. If you're an e-commerce store like Amazon, you have a lot of AI things built into that platform now. You can also automate a lot of tasks in apps and have chatbots, which most people don't realize they're not chatting with a human if you use AI to, chat with your customers in your apps. Fourth is just 5G cell technology. This is allowing for faster data transfers. So you can have more interactive and interesting apps than you could a few years ago. And it really helps people get a good experience. So it enables a lot of new opportunities for apps as people are getting more adopted to 5G across the country. And lastly, I get asked quite a bit, well, what are some options for no coding or low code apps? And this means you don't need to be a developer. So there's going to be some options we're going to talk about later. And small businesses can really benefit sometimes from using a no code or a low code platform like these three. And we're going to talk about the pros and the cons of that becoming more popular throughout 2024. So as we talked about, there's these two major platforms. You're probably all familiar with Android and Google. There's a few criteria you need to be aware of as you select which platform or platforms you want to launch your app on. The first thing we should consider is the quality and the quantity of the apps on the app stores. As we already saw, there's about twice as many on the Google Store, but they generate, in general, about half the revenue for the app creators. The development process is also different between these two, as is the approval process for getting your app published to the store, and the cost is also different. One thing to note is that a trend in 2024 is that almost 50% of small businesses are using what's called a cross-platform development solution. So you don't need to pick one or the other. It's becoming quite popular to develop something that's basically a hybrid app that is launched on both stores simultaneously, and you can just develop and maintain one piece of code for both platforms. There's some pros and cons to this, but overall it is definitely gaining some traction this year. And I think it's a trend we're going to continue to see increase over the next couple of years. So some of the main differences between Android and Apple are that the platform that they are developed on, Android uses the Java platform, whereas Apple uses Swift. You can see here the market share globally. Android has a huge percent of the market share, about 87%, while Apple has much less market share. But if your target market is North America or even Europe, it's closer to 50-50. These demographics are really skewed in continents like Africa and Asia, where the majority of users are on the Android and Google platforms. So if you're thinking of selling primarily in the US, Apple does have a higher market share here, but if your market is international, the breakdown is 87% is Android. Now, Android does take a little bit more time to develop for in general, and this just has to do with that programming language of Java. The approval process for Android is much shorter, can happen within a couple of days, whereas Apple does a much more detailed analysis of code to make sure there's not things like viruses in it or anything malicious. So this can take a couple of weeks or even longer, and you need to be aware that you might not be able to launch on their store immediately. The cost is basically less on Android overall, and it does depend on what features you're developing for. Sorry, I meant that the cost is generally less on Apple. And this is because the Swift programming language, it tends to be a bit quicker to program in. And on the Android side with Java, it can take a little bit more time. But again, it does depend on what features you're using. Some features are just quicker and easier to develop on one platform over the other. And you can talk to a developer and analyze what features you need to figure out which platform might be the cheapest, unless you want to do a cross-platform solution. And as I already mentioned, the demographics are that Apple tends to be more prominent in higher income groups than the Android. As far as getting set up on one of the stores, with Android, you can expect to spend a one-time fee of $20. And then the store fee is 15% of all your revenue. This is just to be up on the store for the first $1 million of revenue you make. And then beyond $1 million, they take 30%. Now, this is very similar to the Apple Store. It does have a higher fee of $99 per year, but the same 15% fee up to the first $1 million in revenue and then 30% thereafter. So this is trying to help people who are smaller in scale pay a lesser fee than those who get really big. So now that we've gone over some of the trends and the basic considerations of should your business think about developing an app, we're going to talk now about the 8 key steps to develop your app. Now, the first one is always going to be research. You need to do market research and really think of your target audience's problem that you're solving with your app. Now, if you have an existing business, maybe it's a brick and mortar business and you sell items that are physical, you might want an app to promote the business or to be a portal for people to see and buy those items. So you need to think about how the app will be useful to them, and you can design it in such a way that it really appeals. Secondly is scoping out the app. You need to think of the feature list that your app is going to have. Now, probably most apps aren't going to be able to have every single feature that the creator wants because of cost and time. So you can identify those that are critical to have and also nice to have features, which you might be able to develop later. This process helps you to define a minimum viable product, which is a common term in developing apps, and it just means it's going to have those core critical features, but the nice to have features won't be included at the very beginning because of cost, so you might roll those out in 6 to 12 months once your app has started generating some revenue for your business. Step number 3 is finding the right developer. We're going to talk about the pros and cons of different development options, but I always recommend you shop for 2 to 3 different quotes from developers and compare both local options in Virginia to offshore options. Also, reading reviews on platforms like Facebook, or people can leave reviews, or even Google Maps. And you can look at the developer's portfolio of apps to see if you like their style and design. Step number 4 is figuring out a really solid business plan. So you're going to know how much it's going to cost to develop the app after step 3. Now you need to make sure you know how you're going to get a return on that investment and what features and functions you need to have in the app to make that work. This is also the stage where you'll look at different app revenue models, such as the free model, in-app purchases, and others, to see how you're going to best monetize your app. Step number 5 is working out your marketing approach. You're going to further identify target customers. You can do things like building a buyer persona, which really helps you understand your customers' needs. And you're going to finalize that strategy to reach your customer, whether it's through social media marketing, SEO, or your website, or other means of marketing. You need to have that plan really finalized and solid before you go on to step number 6. This is building a prototype, which is also called an MVP. And this is essentially going to give you those critical features. It's going to build those out in a way that it makes the app usable and give you a chance to incorporate user feedback and fix bugs, and also add features to iterate on your design. After the prototype, you will be launching the app, and we're going to talk about doing a closed beta test and an open beta test as a way to get further feedback and refine the app. And step number 8 is when you really start a marketing budget and execute your marketing plan. So hopefully you have a great app that's well polished, it suits the needs of your customers. You can start promoting it and start seeing those users and start using the app, get on the platform, and start making revenue for your business. So one of my favorite quotes by Richard Branson, who created the Virgin group of companies, was that find a big problem that's just going to get worse and fix it. And I think this is a great thing to keep in mind as you consider developing an app, or indeed any business, because you want to be fixing a problem that exists for a lot of people, and you want that problem to preferably be getting bigger, and so your app will grow and your revenue for the business will grow. So if you already have an existing business, you probably already solved this problem, but for some of you, you might still be on this path of figuring out what the problem is you're solving. So conducting market research is really important. Even if you have a business, this is a good idea to go through as you see to invest in an app. And the first step is to interview. So talk to people who are in your target market and your target demographic, and see what the ideas are that you have for your app, and just see how that's received. You want to get a lot of feedback. And step number 2 is you want to keep a narrow focus. So as you talk to your target customers, you don't want to ask really open-ended questions or let them go off on too many tangents. You want to have a list of things you're trying to collect data for. So you might have 5 to 10 questions, and you want to make sure you get those answered. You can even ask things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is this feature? And you can get some quantitative results, which can help give you some data-driven insights and make some good decisions. Step number 3 is you can use a variety of free forms to help collect data in this step. And I like any of these, which are Typeform, SurveyMonkey, or Google Forms, which you can either send to potential customers or just fill out on their behalf as you talk to them. And these will provide a variety of benefits, such as collecting your data and presenting you with charts and graphs automatically to help you understand what your customers are saying. And the last step with the market research process is always saying thank you, because you hope that a lot of the people you talked to and interviewed will become future users of the app, early adopters. And if they really love it, then they might help promote it and talk to their friends about it. This is a great way to build some initial momentum with your app. Step number 2 is about defining that minimum viable product. And how do you think about this process? So the chart on the left is 2 ways to think about the minimum viable product. First off, on the very left side of the pyramid, we have the wrong way to do it. In this way, you think of, how can I make this app functional? And you really focus on that. You make it a very functional app, but you forget to make it either reliable, usable, and emotionally friendly, having good emotional design, things like colors and fonts and things like that. That's not how you want to develop your product, because if it's not reliable, usable, or has good emotional design, people won't be able to use it very well. So a minimum viable product is more like the example on the right pyramid, where you take a little section of both functional, reliable, usable, and having good design. The benefits of this are that you focus on building the core app features first while still making it a very usable and functional app. And with any business launching an app, or indeed most technology products, you want to get a lot of early testing in to collect the feedback. And this also gives you quick market validation. You might spend only a small amount of money building an MVP. Let's say your budget is $5,000 and you make an MVP for $500. You test it and you just find out, wow, this was way off base. It's never going to work like this. You might need to scrap the whole thing, but you've only spent 10% of your budget. So you're able to make more versions and go off and try different ideas. And it's much less costly and quicker to develop MVPs and the full pyramid of the full app. Here's another illustration of developing an MVP, which I think is helpful to really understand the concept. So if the goal here is to build something that ends up like a car, it's a vehicle for transporting people around. So you don't want to start by building a wheel and then two wheels that are connected, then building a skateboard, then half a car, then a full car. Rather, the process would look something more like this. You start with something that provides the same basic function. The skateboard, it still can get people around, but you improve it by making it a scooter, then a bicycle, then a motorcycle, and finally the car. And the point of this is that it's a usable product every step of the way as it keeps getting better and better. So another very important thing when developing an app is choosing the right developer. And you typically have two options. You can choose a US-based developer. I've worked with many in Virginia and around the DC area. Or you can choose an offshore developer. And I've also worked with many developers in India, China, and Eastern Europe. So there's some pros and cons to both of these. The first thing to consider is the quality of the app. And apps are really based and built kind of like using mathematical formulas. So developers in the US or offshore are just as capable of understanding these complex formulas and coding requirements, so that quality tends to be about the same. The communication with US-based developers I found is just usually better, both because they're closer in time zone, they understand the culture better, and they speak English with more fluency than an offshore developer. It's not to say that communication can never succeed with an offshore developer, but you usually end up making some compromises along the way. Maybe you have meetings late at night here or early in the morning, or you struggle with some English language barriers along the way. Time to build an app, again, is very similar between US and offshore developers. The cost, however, for US developers is typically around 3 times what an offshore developer would be. So for example, a mobile app that's a $3,000 app built in Indian developers would be probably 8, 9, or even $10,000 with a US-based developer for essentially the same app. And another key consideration is, will the developer want to stick with you to help you make updates and fix bugs months or years after the app launches? And from my experience, both US and offshore developers are very eager to maintain relationships with their clients. So they're happy to provide things like maintenance contracts or hours of bug fixes every month for a small set amount, which can help you keep the communication going and keep them in the loop in case you need to make more significant changes to the app. They're always ready to help. A question that I've been getting asked more and more frequently this year is, what are some options for low code or no code development? So what are some of the benefits of going this route? The first one is speed. You're able to build and launch your app much quicker. It can take just days or weeks instead of months. Secondly, the cost, you can keep the development costs low, and there's affordable subscription plans for these options. The next benefit is testing and prototyping. All of these platforms here let you quickly test your ideas with real users before you give a full development and full deployment of your app. And they're also flexible. You can easily update and modify your apps as your business grows. And these are becoming more popular as time goes on. These are three that are probably the most popular and worthwhile to consider. We'll look at them each individually here, look at some of the pros and cons. Again, so if anybody's not clear, low code or no code, it just means you're able to more or less drag and drop elements onto a screen on your website to kind of visually make an app. It's very helpful for people with no development experience, and they know kind of exactly what they want their app to do. And they don't want to hire a developer, but they want to do it themselves without learning development. So the first one here is Appy Pie. I think in terms of use, it's very easy. The cost is also pretty reasonable. It's $18 a month, up to $60 a month, depending on what features you need. It does offer platform support for Android, iOS, and also web app. So we're going to see the web app, which has not been talked about yet. But all that means is that you're going to develop a website, and your app is going to do nothing but essentially go to your website and kind of wrap it in what looks like an app. So it's kind of indistinguishable from an app, but it is just a website in the background. So that's what a web app is. Appy Pie offers only basic customization. And I think it's really best for real beginners that have no coding experience because it has a low learning curve. It has a really great community and a lot of good support, so you're able to ask questions both from the community of users and also the company itself, get answers pretty quickly. The second one is Bubble. It's a different type of no-code platform. It's more a moderate ease of use. It's definitely a bit more expensive as well. It gives you the same platform supports. And as far as customizing the app, you have a lot more features here. I won't go into the details of all the different features it can offer, but for example, if you want to integrate a real-time map within your app and kind of see your location and a user's location and use the GPS on their phone, you can do things like that with Bubble much more easily. And in some cases, it wouldn't be available at all on a platform like Appy Pie. So Bubble is best for more complex or data-driven apps that are doing more computation and analysis. It has a higher learning curve. And because of these things, it can be higher performance. So if your app is relatively complex, it's not a simple app, but there's a lot going on, it can be a faster and better performing app with Bubble, just with the features it offers. And the last one is Adalo. It's also very easy. It's rather expensive. It's a good alternative to Appy Pie, where it has some moderate customization. And it's really great if you need to quickly prototype and create different versions of an app. Useful if you have a lot of different ideas you want to bounce off people and get their feedback very quickly. So these are all good options. If you're looking for a low-code or no-code development option that you can start with yourself, I would encourage you to check out one of these three. So no matter what route you go with your development, whether it's in the US offshore or you go it yourself with a no-code or low-code system, you need to have a really solid revenue model in place to make sure your app is going to pay off with the time and money you spend in it or you spend developing it. So here are some of the main revenue models that apps use. Using one or more of these in conjunction can sometimes give you the best results, just depending on your market and what product you're selling. So the first revenue model is in-app advertising. We've all seen this. It has the banners. It makes your app free to use for the most part, but these banners can be annoying to users if you use them too much and too frequently. Secondly are the in-app purchases. As we've already seen, these are becoming quite popular as a way to generate revenue. You can offer your app for free, but then users can unlock certain features in the app as they go. One thing to note here is that whatever in-app purchases are made, those stores are still going to charge that 15 to 30% fee, even if it's not on the sale of your app, but an in-app purchase. They know that, and they will charge you the fee. The next way is a subscription model. This is great if your customers want to sign up for a month or a year and you have a really consistent cash flow with this model. But obviously, they're not going to be suitable for all types of apps. And this really depends on your market and your business that you're selling and what your product is. The next one is freemium. Freemium gives your customers no barrier to entry to use the app. So essentially, they can have access to all the features right away, but you might have a time limit, so 7 days or 15 days, and then they can unlock more usage after that. Sometimes it can be tricky with this, as with the in-app purchases, to really determine what would be free versus paid, how long should they get for free before they have to pay, and those types of things. So it's good to get feedback from actual customers on that before you set your policy hard in stone, so you make sure you hit the right balance. Next is having a paid app. So this is just simply you have to buy the app before you can download it. It's predictable revenue. You earn it in advance. You pay the 15 to 30% fee though. And there's strong competition. Only 2% of apps follow this model. So if you're confident that your users would buy the app, you can try this model, but for general, it's going to be easier to sell with a different model, like a freemium model. And lastly, are sponsorships. So this can be great almost for any type of business because you can probably always find sponsors in your industry, but it's going to take a large user base of people using your app before any sponsor would feel like it was worth it to pay for their ad or their commercial or advertisement to be in your app. So hopefully this gives some idea of the options out there, and you have in your mind now a sense of which model or models would be best for your app. The fifth step is working on your marketing approach. How are you going to market your app? Well, the first thing here is to identify your target customers, and you can build buyer personas. So ask yourself, what are your target customers looking for? Where are they looking for this information? Commonly, people are looking on social media, of course, but there could be other sources of information. There might be trade shows or conventions or associations. So you want to figure out where your customer is looking for information. For example, I worked with a startup that was doing environmental work, and they had a big tree preservation conference once a year, and all of their customers were there. So they set up a booth, and I helped them set up their booth and their marketing materials for this. And it was a perfect place to get in front of their target customer with their new app. So think about where your customers are. Secondly, determining what your customers' wants and needs are. You can really formulate your marketing message once you've talked to them and understood how your app is solving their problems. And the best way to do this is just to get a lot of feedback from potential customers. Don't be afraid of talking to people on the street, on a phone call, in an email, whatever format you can take, the more feedback, the better. And then when you start to market your app, there's a few ways that is most effective to do it in 2024, and I believe next year as well. The first one is App Store optimization. And this is a variety of strategies. It's kind of like SEO or search engine optimization for websites, but they help your app rank higher in search results in the app stores. So very important. Influencer marketing is also a very good way to get your app promoted. So if you're in a certain industry and you know who the popular people are, these influencers, contacting them, asking them if they would use your app in a video or any way you want to do that, and have an influencer help you market your app, usually in exchange for some compensation. And the last one is you can market with user-generated content. So one really good example of this I saw was the action camera company GoPro has historically used user-submitted action videos in their promotional materials and for all their marketing materials, which is great because they're authentic, they're from the actual users, they're using the actual products. GoPro, buys them for a little amount of money, and then they have all the marketing material they need. So figure out how you can use some sort of user-generated content perhaps in your marketing, and it can be a win-win. So building a prototype is the next step, and this is a key part before you go down the path of really spending time developing the end app and how it's going to look. It's a quick mock-up of the app, and you can see here what a wireframe can typically look like, or it can kind of walk you from the home screen of the app through different pages of the app, what buttons will go to what pages, and this is a necessary step in developing any app or even a website. And it's a good thing to think through this. There's a few tools here which you can use, Just-in-Mind and Mockflow, which have a free tier, and you can just go in and start kind of playing with different app designs. Now, some really good things to ways to gather user feedback would be if you have a website for the app or for your business, you can ask for feedback from people. You can offer a download link or a link where they can go and kind of interact with the mockup in Just in Mind or Mockflow and leave feedback. You can also use platforms like Slack or Discord to gather feedback on an app design and wireframe. You can also do surveys and use social media to let people express their feelings about the direction your app is going, what it looks like, and how it works. Trust me, the more feedback you can get at this stage, you'll probably avoid some problems later down the road and fixing the app if it was designed kind of incorrectly, which could be very costly. So at this point, you've found the developer, you've wireframed out the app, you're ready to test the app and launch it to a broader group, and this is often called beta testing. And at this stage, testers are going to report bugs they find, and they'll keep suggesting features or improvements in the app. So there's two types of beta testing. The first one we'll talk about is an open beta test. It really allows anybody from a large group or anybody interested at all, people you don't really know, to use the app and provide some feedback on it. And it serves a purpose of both you can demonstrate the product to a group of potential users, but also you can get a lot of feedback and find more obscure errors or bugs or issues that you didn't find before. Another type of beta test is a closed beta, which you're going to restrict it to a smaller group of people. You'll generally send out an invite link that can only be activated once. So you send it just to the people you want to get the feedback from. So, if you don't think it's ready to be used by a wide audience, or for whatever reason you don't want random people to perhaps see the app, you can do a closed beta. I think it's always good to do a beta test for between a month to maybe 2 months in length. And this provides you ample time to collect feedback from your beta testers. So the last key step here is in promoting the app. If you've developed a great app and you spent a lot of thought and time and money on it, you need a really effective way of promoting it at this point to get it out to the target market you want to sell to. And here's our 4 tactics in really promoting the app that I find work the best. First one is having a website. So if your existing business has a website, you might think of a way to incorporate the app onto that. You can maybe provide a video demonstration of the app on your homepage with download links. But if you don't have a website yet, you could create one for the app, and it gives you your business and the app a bit more polish and a look of legitimacy as people research what does the app do? What's this company behind it? Also, if you're looking for investors to invest in a business that's either primarily app driven or has an app component, they're going to like to see that you have a nice polished website, probably talking about the app. Social media is a hugely important place to promote and market your app. You can both just do organic promotion, which would be posting on Facebook, Twitter/X, Instagram, and other pages. You could also consider YouTube or TikTok or whatever social media platform you're used to and on. And also, it's good to create your accounts and start following people within your target market and industry, like the influencers, because if they notice your product, they might mention it, or at least you could start a collaboration with them down the road where they might help you promote that. Like with any type of business, you don't want to just have promotional emails in a social media channel, but instead try to have meaningful conversation about how your app is solving these problems that you've identified. This will be much more interesting to your readers, and they're more likely to follow you and retweet or like your posts, which will get them greater coverage. You can also do paid ads on social media, which can be very useful if you have a marketing budget and you really want your posts or your mention of your app to be seen by not just dozens, but hundreds or thousands of people. You can pay to promote that. The next way to market is with public relations. I've worked with apps and companies that have done a press release. You can host a party, a launch party to kind of get the word out and to celebrate the release of an app. You can try to get interviews with newspapers or even bloggers as online forums. Again, these influencers trying to kind of talk to your target market about your app to get the word out there. And these celebrity endorsements can be really valuable at this point, both as a promotional tool and helping you build connections within your target market. So you can think about, are there any industry-specific influencers that you're aware of? Maybe you already have a connection to, and maybe they could be useful to promote your product when the time is right. Another key trend we see becoming more important is the issue of data security and privacy. This both affects the users of an app, of course, as you sign lengthy, privacy statements that probably you don't read or understand, but also you as a developer of an app. Now you're legally responsible to what those documents say, and are you doing them right? So why does data security matter for you as the creator of an app? Why should you pay attention to it? Well, the first thing is user trust. We've all seen news stories about big data breaches, and we've probably had data stolen on the internet. And as we get these spam, emails and spam texts and all sorts of stuff, that's usually a result of our phone number and our name getting leaked through some data breach. So if you have a data breach, it obviously doesn't build trust. And you can build your user trust by having a focus on their data security, help them have more long-term loyalty. You also need to be legally compliant. Europe has the GDPR regulations, and the US has similar legal requirements depending on your industry. And so you don't want to get fined by breaking some requirement for the type of industry you're in. Also, having good business continuity, as we mentioned, security breaches can cause reputational damage. You don't want to have that happen or disrupt your business operations. And in the last 2023 and 2024, the average cost of a data breach has been over $4 million. And this is both for large businesses being targeted and the average with small ones. But small businesses are not immune to being targeted. Often hackers see them as a vulnerable platform because they probably didn't have the knowledge or the money to invest in a very secure app. So they can do things like taking customer data, holding that for ransom. So even being a small business, you can be targeted. So those are some of the reasons why data security matters to you. So how do you secure data in your app? There's a lot of detail that can be gone into here, but to summarize this, the first thing you can do is encryption. And make sure that your app is developed with passwords and any personal information encrypted at rest, which means if it's entered into a website but not yet submitted, and also in transit, which means after they've clicked a submit button, and that's now going from your app on their phone to your server, which is going to store that. The industry standard is SSL encryption for data transmission, and you can even encrypt data using encryption algorithms like AES 256. SSL and the AES should be sufficient for safeguarding pretty much any data transmission. And development teams should be very aware of these protocols and be able to implement them. Secondly, is using secure authentication. This would be using multi-factor authentication. We've all seen this become more and more common, especially with banks or something where they will text you a code. You have to enter the code in the app or the website. So that's MFA authentication, and it's used to reduce unauthorized access to somebody's account. You can also limit login attempts to prevent what's called a brute force attacks, where a hacker would just try to guess common passwords. And the last method is data minimization. So really think about, if somebody's using your app, what do you need to collect? What data are you going to collect? It's best to collect the minimum amount of data. People don't like giving permission of an app to access a lot of things that don't make sense. For example, if you have an e-commerce app and you're asking to access their GPS and their location, they might say, why does it need this? And they might decide not to allow that permission or just to not install the app at all. So really think about and think with your development team, what data are you going to collect? What permissions do you need on that user's phone? And also regularly review your app's data practices. I would probably do this at least once a year, would be to see, well, what data are you collecting? If you've been using it to make good business decisions over the last year, then it's probably good data to collect. But if you found you haven't needed it or haven't used it, you might consider scrapping that and updating versions that don't require that level of data collection. Again, the less data collection essentially is better. So that wraps up the majority of the presentation of the slides I've prepared. I'd love to hear your questions now about mobile app development, see if I can answer them for you. And feel free to type them in here to the chat box, and we'll get through as many of them as we do have time for today. Thank you.
Thanks, Cameron. Yeah, we don't have anything in our Q&A box at the moment, but if anyone has questions, we can definitely take this opportunity to pick Cameron's brain.
Yeah, just let me know anything you were wondering as I spoke about the app development process, or if you have other questions on topics I didn't cover, let me know and I might be able to answer that for you.
And I just put up a poll if everyone could take a moment to complete that while you're thinking of your questions. That will help us for our future webinars and giving you all what actually you're looking for and what interests you. This might be a first if we don't have any questions. Boy, you must have really fine-tuned this presentation, Cameron.
You'll have to think of a couple questions then.
Uh-oh. I'm on the spot. You don't want to put that to me. I ask a lot of questions typically. I'm that person. Okay, I think we got one in here. Okay, so we have a question. Have you seen non-developers creating apps using the platforms you have mentioned?
Yes, I both advised small businesses on learning those platforms. There's also a lot of great tutorials. If you I look at all three of those. If one looks appealing to you, you can YouTube some videos of like how to get started. You have people explaining the process. It's probably going to take a couple hours to get familiar with the interface and just how to go about creating an app, but it's not so hard. You don't need to know how to code. You don't need to get into the coding language, which is the nice part about it. So I think it's definitely doable, and I think that there's a big trend is going that way, which can save you time and money if you're able to develop an app yourself, especially if it's on the simple end. Apps can range between a couple simple pages and hundreds or thousands of pages, so it does depend on what you're trying to build.
Let's see. Would this info benefit a mental wellness app?
Well, that's a good question. I actually worked with an entrepreneur to develop a mental wellness app, and it's kind of a meditation app a few years ago. So yeah, I think pretty much all of the steps that I described here are steps that I went through with that small business owner a couple of years ago. So they're all very relevant, and these slides and these steps are built on my experience helping people develop apps and websites. So yeah, I think all of these steps are relevant, and you should not skip any of them if you're trying to make a successful app.
Another question. What should be a major difference between app and website apart from the ease of access?
Yeah, so if you're a business and you're thinking about developing either a website or an app, which is I think what the question is referring to, um, they kind of have different purposes. So a website could be more for you're trying to get information to your customers about your products. Maybe you want them for sale on the website. People are more used to websites for those types of things. People don't like installing unnecessary apps, so it's going to be easier to get somebody to look at your business website and learn about your business than get them to download and install your app to learn about your business. So, without knowing about your goals for the website or the app, it's hard to give more specific recommendations. But apps have their own purpose, especially if you think of the apps you use the most. It might be social media, they might be media consumption, they might be communication like texting and phone calls. So certain things lend themselves to apps, and certain things lend themselves to websites. And if you wanted to give us more details about what you're thinking about, we could discuss it further.
Great. Let's see. What are your thoughts about Patreon?
So Patreon it's a platform I didn't talk about here, but it's essentially a way for you to have a product for sale, or have a community of people to fund you in your creation of a product or even artwork. So musicians use it, or people selling digital products like CD downloads. I mean, it's not really something that's part of the app development conversation. I think in general, Patreon's been a solid choice for people who I know have used it. but it's not something that I'm really an expert in.
Let's see, what are your thoughts on the importance or benefits of using a developer being outsourced versus being part of the founding team or an employee?
Yeah. So trying to have a founding member of a startup also be your developer, it does have pros and cons. I think the biggest con is that you might not be able to pay that person a market salary of what they could make, working at a large company. So you might need to give them equity in your startup. And sometimes that individual might be more or less motivated to do a good and fast job on development with that equity. So, some people are really motivated by the thought of equity, and other people would rather have cash. And I've seen situations where a developer getting paid a little bit under market rates for a startup that they were kind of a founding member of just really went slow or was sloppy. So that could be one experience. Now, the advantage of hiring like an offshore developer to build an app as opposed to having someone on your team to be your developer is that generally they're going to be faster because they're going to have a whole team dedicated to you as a client and to build your app. And they might very well be cheaper as well, especially if you're looking in India or a place like that. The costs are a lot cheaper. So those are a couple of pros and cons. Of course, there's probably a lot more. If you want to give some more details about your situation, I might be able to give you some more recommendations.
What makes an app successful in your opinion?
I think it all comes down to that quote, which said, find a problem that's there and it's just going to get bigger and find a way to solve it. So almost that's the key to every successful business, really, is you've got to be solving a need for your target market. So the app's no different. And not only does an app need to solve a need or solve a problem, but it needs to do it in a kind of a graphical, user and beautiful way that people want to come back to. So the challenge of developing an app is twofold, both solving that need and secondly, making it look good and intuitive and user-friendly.
Are there no low-code options for back-end infrastructure that apps can use? And would there be any security drawbacks to a no low code?
So as far as security goes, I don't think that there's drawbacks in my experience. Obviously, with some of the options that I listed that were more user-friendly, less customizable, they're, they take your security very seriously, but they're not going to give you flexibility and kind of what encryption standards they're going to implement for you, et cetera. If you want flexibility because you might have sensitive needs, let's say you're in the medical profession, so you had HIPAA regulations, you might find that these aren't going to support your level of security needed, and therefore you might need to use a real development team that can go more in depth on security. But for a lot of people, I think they're going to be completely fine. I wouldn't see that as a risk or a downside of using a no code or low code platform.
Do we have any other questions? We got one. Let's see. This is the long one, so bear with me. So I'm heavily involved in the roller derby community as a player, coach, and referee. I'm interested in making a game clinic finder for skaters and officials. Most folks' teams are using Facebook groups and small local discords to find or share their games. I'm brainstorming an app that would help centralize this info on a live updating map where users can manage, respond to posts, kind of like Craigslist for roller derby games. What do you think? Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually worked with some people doing similar things with sports coaching and finding a coach on a map and kind of having the sports theme as well, the athletics theme. I think yeah, of course it's possible to make. I think you probably would want to go with a development team that's familiar with integrating Google Maps or another map platform. Probably the no-code options aren't going to work for this. This is a bit too complex. It's going to need to access user GPS and some of those phone permissions, which are a bit more advanced. But it's certainly doable. I think it would be an interesting thing to explore in more detail. If you wanted to reach out to me directly, you can email the address here that's on the screen. It's help@virginiasbdc.org. And you can let me know you want to speak with me, and I'd be happy to discuss that a bit more with you. I can also I have a list of developers I've worked with here, both in Virginia and offshore. So if we find that I have a recommendation or referral I can make to you for a good developer for this, I'll certainly do that.
What are your thoughts about using white label options for our own drag and drop low code app like Passion.io?
So I'm not familiar with Passion.io. Um, but the other part of your question was, white labeling a platform that you've created for no code for apps, it sounds like. I mean, there's pros and cons for white labeling it and kind of repackaging it as maybe somebody else's platform. So yeah, I guess without having more information, it's hard to say what I would recommend for that.
Okay. If the person who put that question up wants to elaborate, that would be great. We have some time. And then we do have another question. What are your favorite apps? Or do you have an example of an app that is flawless and engaging?
Great question. A lot of my family and friends use this language learning app called Duolingo. And I like to give this as an example for a really well-made app for several reasons. One, it solves a problem, right? So there's a lot of people in the world who want to learn another language. That's the problem. The app solves it. So check that box. Number two, it's beautifully designed, has a good interface. It's intuitive, but it's also kind of fun. So people enjoy looking at it. So check that box. And they've done another thing, which I alluded to earlier, which was making your app kind of like a game. So gamifying an app. And Duolingo does this by kind of giving you levels and tiers and these rewards as you achieve milestones. And also, I believe they have like the leaderboards, and you can see your progress versus your friend's progress in learning a new language. They were really one of the first to do this with language, and they have continued in their dominance in this field. So I think if you want to look at a great app that's well designed and thought out, check out Duolingo. But there's certainly a lot. I think if you just look at, the top 10 downloaded apps on Android or Apple, all of these top apps have solved this problem. They include things like Facebook, and Duolingo would be up there too. So any of these top apps have really nailed it on the head, and they've continued usually in their dominance year after year. You don't really see much change in the top 10.
We did have a follow-up to the Passion.io platform. That's what they're using for their own branded app. I'm not sure if it's a wise option long-term. Maybe they can have a side chat. So I think I'm going to recommend them to help at virginiasbdc.org if you'd like to. And I can pass that on to Cameron, your email on, and you all can maybe
That
chat a
sounds
little bit
great.
more. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I review old text. The big problem is that getting bigger. There's now $1.5 billion that goes unclaimed. I look to get that money back from U.S. citizens all over the world. How can I use the app in my company? Can you see that one? I might want you to read that one if you have any thoughts or.
I guess I didn't quite understand the
Yeah,
question.
see the question from Diane. Can you see that one?
Let me see. I don't normally have the questions
Oh, I'm
up
sorry. I can
here.
read it again. So it says, I review old texts. The big problem is that getting bigger is there is now $1.5 billion. It goes unclaimed, and I look to get that money back to the US citizens all over the world. How could I use
Hmm.
an app in my company?
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what
Yeah,
what that means. But it's Diane, if it's something that we probably don't have time to get into here. But if you want to email the help email address, ask to talk to me, then I'm sure we can maybe have a side conversation about that. Maybe I can help. I don't know much about tax and international tax, but I might be able to give you some useful recommendations.
um, so the next one again, looking for guidelines from you. I'm just going to, anyone who would like to talk more to Cameron, please email help@virginiasbdc.org. Or you can ask also your local SBDC advisor or be connected. But just send us an email and we'll get you to the right place. Make sure we get you some assistance.
Yeah, that's a great point because we do have other tax experts.
Right.
So it might be useful in that last question that I might have some guidance, but we have other advisors who know about the tax side. So it's useful
Yeah.
sometimes to loop in a couple experts and we can really help solve that problem, whereas I don't always have all the answers.
So, okay. Do we have any other questions? Last words of wisdom.
Well, I just encourage everybody, if you can, to come to the next session, which is on ChatGPT. We're going to talk some about marketing in that. We're going to talk about using AI and ChatGPT for your small business or your startup. So it's going to be a great session, and we always get a lot of good conversation and questions and those as well. So if you can make it to that, feel free to sign up. It's on the SBDC's calendar on the website.
Right. And I dropped it in the chat earlier too. And I think it was, if you're not already signed up to get our emails that went out yesterday as well. So we send those out every Monday, an email that has all the links to our upcoming webinars. So go ahead and get signed up for that too on our website. Oh, we have another question that dropped in. How do you think apps will evolve in the future?
That's a great question. I think that people creating their own apps is going to be more common, and less common will be hiring development teams. That's rather expensive, and most businesses don't want to spend that much money. So using AI to help you generate apps will probably be popular, and using these kind of no-code options. But I think with it being easier for people to make their own apps, you're going to see a giant increase in the number of apps. So you might have a overwhelming number of apps, even more so than the billions that are already there. So you see, it could be an issue of everybody can make an app, so the value of the apps kind of decreases. It could happen. So we'll have to see, how technology progresses and how the market responds to that.
Okay. I'm going to put out a last call for questions and then wrap us up. See if anything drops in. Thank you, Cameron. And thank you, everyone who attended today. You will receive an email with a link to the recording and to the slides. If you would like to sign up for upcoming webinars or access recorded webinars, or to sign up to get our email every Monday with all the list of webinars, please visit virginiasbdc.org/training. This webinar and other SBD resources are designed to be used in collaboration with your local SBDC advisors. You can sign up for a free and confidential session by emailing help@virginiasbdc.org or via our website. And we hope to see you at our next session on November 19th or sooner. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.